What's going on, guys? Illuminostic. Last night after my premiere of the video that I made about Robert Anton Wilson, I was kind of thinking about it, and I realized that there's a lot of really interesting stuff that wasn't even alluded to in that video, and I wanted to talk about some of that stuff because I've actually had some of the experiences that that I'm referencing. And the interesting thing in particular is this experience that Robert Anton Wilson had in 1974, where he felt that he was in telepathic communication with alien from Sirius B. And as it turns out, this is something that occultists have been claiming for thousands of years, and it's always Sirius B. Whether or not Robert Anton Wilson was already aware of that and that this idea was just planted in his head, it is very, very likely, you know, and we have to really consider these things. One of my biggest complaints with, you know, channeling and people that believe in the whole starseed thing is that there are people just totally abandon skepticism and common sense and are really eager to kind of believe this stuff, and so there isn't a lot of scrutiny that's applied to these ideas a lot of times. In fact, you know, while we're on the subject of starseeds, a lot of New Agers really look down on Timothy Leary. A lot of them believe that he was a government agent, and a lot of them think that psychedelics are just bad tools of the devil. And as it turns out, the term starseed and the concept of communicating with these extraterrestrials telepathically from other star systems originated with Timothy Leary. He actually coined the term starseed in this context, which is something that I just remembered today. And you know, the guy that is popularly popularized the Starseed Transmissions does not credit Timothy Leary, and I don't think it's a coincidence. He just totally lifted that and pretended like it didn't happen, which is a very common experience for people like Timothy Leary and other people that go against the status quo. It's also a fact that Tim Leary influenced a lot of mainstream psychology and is not credited for any of it because of his association with LSD and the blacklisting that occurred at Harvard and all of that. And so here's the story in a nutshell. Robert Anton Wilson believed that he had been in telepathic communication with this alien from Sirius B, and he was receiving all sorts of information about the secret doctrine, occult stuff, and really, you know, from our point of view now, it seems almost ridiculous that you would need an alien to tell you this stuff, because most of it is really readily obvious to any even marginally enlightened person. Which brings me to another side note about channeling and starseeds and all of this, that you shouldn't really need to predicate your teachings or your ideas on this idea that they come from a superior being in order to give them validity. Truth is self-substantiating, and so, you know, that's another reason I'm always very skeptical about people that claim channeling and starseed transmissions. You shouldn't really need to do that, and even if they are coming from an alien being, why does that give them any more importance than they would have coming from a human? It's just a being on another planet. Even if they're astronomically, you know, more advanced than we are, the fundamentals of the message are still going to reduce to the same thing, that our point of existence is to try to be kind, at least to try not to be an asshole, and to be creative and experience the universe's creations on its behalf as sentient avatars of the universal consciousness, right? So I don't know what people think an alien or an interdimensional being is going to tell them that's going to be so far beyond all that. And the answer in my experience is nothing. There's nothing in any of the material that really couldn't have originated with a human being, except for a few instances of very convincing precognition, which is something that I experienced and something that may have occurred with Robert Anton Wilson, although in that instance it was a garbled transmission as well. And so what really strikes me about the situation, though, is that when Robert Anton Wilson published his experiences in Cosmic Trigger, The Final Secret of the Illuminati, shortly after his daughter was beaten to death on her way home while they were living in LA. And after that happened, Robert Anton Wilson started to say that he had gone insane, that there was no reality to anything in, you know, that the alien had transmitted to him. And it occurred to me that it might be possible that Robert Anton Wilson took that position later because he still had a daughter that was alive, and he didn't want a repeat, you know. And I don't know, you know, who's watching exactly and how aware you are of Robert Anton Wilson's role in all of this, but he actually pretty much single-handedly popularized the idea of the Illuminati and the secret societies. Although most of the people that believe in this stuff nowadays are not really bright enough to read his book, I don't think, or at least it doesn't appear that way to me. Because one of the most important things about the Illuminatus trilogy, Timothy Leary once said it's more important than Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, which is a marvelously impossible book. It's written in, you know, James Joyce spoke like 72 languages, and so Finnegan's Wake was written in polyglot portmanteau language. So phonetically it's sort of English, but each syllable might be from a different language, and then they're all combined so that there's all this meaning compressed into these, you know, 2 or 3 syllables, so that if you interpret, say, the first syllable in French and the second syllable in Hebrew and the third syllable in whatever, you will, you know, and then there are different alternatives. If you interpret it phonetically, yeah, so you can unfold an entire sentence or even a paragraph from a single word. And the book begins in the middle of the word where it ends, so it makes a complete circle, and then there are all these layers of like things happening, and you can't really tell if it's a dream or if it's someone being reincarnated. It's truly an extraordinary thing, and so it took him 18 years to assemble it as well. It's probably the most extraordinary work of any kind that was ever created by human beings. And so the Illuminatus trilogy, Timothy Leary said, was more important than Finnegan's Wake. And the reason is that the ultimate effect of this book, which he was working on already when Cosmic Trigger was published, is that you will know with absolute certainty that you are never going to know what's going on with the Illuminati and secret societies and world governments. You're just never going to know. And anyone that, you know, to me, belief is a sign of brain damage, especially when it comes to, you know, secret societies and the Illuminati and all that. But the way that that's done in the book is that the main character, you know, he encounters an Illuminati agent who is fighting other Illuminati. There's supposed to be 5 like different divisions of the Illuminati, and they're all battling each other, and none of them know who the real Illuminati is. They don't even know for sure if they're really the Illuminati. And so by the time you're done reading it, you will never again pick up some stupid shit that what is that guy's name, that I'm Alex Jones and I'm a big fat dumbass, you know what I mean? Like, you'll never believe any of those narratives ever again, because you know that there is no way that anyone could ever figure out what is going on with these groups, for sure. And, you know, Robert Anton Wilson actually spent a considerable portion of his life trying to figure it all out, and he's way smarter than me. And there's, according to my aptitude test, there's less than a 1% chance that you're smarter than I am. And I'm about half as intelligent as Robert Anton Wilson, as far as I can tell. So if he couldn't do it, I know I can't do it. And certainly most of the people that think they have done it are definitely wrong. And nobody knows what the fuck is going on. So that is really the, you know, most important experience that comes from the Illuminatus trilogy. But again, there are some remarkable instances have apparently downloaded Precognition. The Patriot Act is in the book. The government starts doing black flag operations, faking terrorist attacks, in order to convince the population that it needed to accept legislation that would take their rights away and give the government greater powers of observation. And here it is, 1974. But the most remarkable instance of precognition in the Illuminatus trilogy is probably the most compelling documented case of precognition anywhere ever, and it could fall under the category of remote viewing as well. At the bottom of the deepest part of the ocean, there's an Illuminati pyramid in the book, right? It was written in 1974. And so, in 2003, I think, don't quote me on that, the pyramid was discovered exactly where it is in the book, like exactly, he gives the coordinates in the book. And so the probability of that, oh, and by the way, Robert Anton Wilson was still alive when that happened, and there's actually YouTube videos where they interview him. Oh yeah, it's winter solstice, yeah, happy winter solstice, everybody. So yeah, I mean, that seems just too much to be coincidence. But then, you know, you have to ask yourself, okay, so what does that mean? You know, how much of the stuff in this book wasn't fiction, for one thing? You know, and it's like 1,100 pages long or something, and they actually constructed the book in part by taking LSD and cutting it up and throwing it in a hat and taking it out and putting it back together. And so you'll fade from one scene inside of to the inside of another character's mind, and it's really, really difficult. Well, you're using transhumanist in a totally inappropriate context. Transhumanism is actually Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson and all of the people that I'm talking about pushing people to evolve their consciousness and to transcend the genetic code and to become more than human. So I don't know what who has a transhumanist agenda. I think he probably means something else. Maybe like AI or something. But okay, so, and I promised to give the real secret of the Illuminati in this video, and I'm going to. But a lot of you aren't going to like it, and anybody that believes the conspiracy theories about the Illuminati definitely won't like it. But I'm fairly well convinced, as was Robert Anton Wilson, who popularized the Illuminati conspiracy theories inadvertently, and he would totally hate it. And the way that it has grown and what it's become, because it's got nothing to do with what he was trying to communicate and what he'd uncovered. But he shares my opinion that the Illuminati do still exist and that they also are not bad. In fact, that if they didn't exist, we would all have long ago been enslaved by totally evil, corrupt elites, and we just wouldn't have a chance of surviving. So, I mean, no, we'd survive, but as slaves, you know. No, I understand what Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson and all those people are trying to do, and it has nothing to do with controlling people with EMFs. That's not transhumanism. That has nothing to do with transhumanism. So, okay, so here's where it gets even weirder. In my own personal experience, I've told this story before on the channel, so forgive me if you're a regular viewer and you've heard it before. But I had an experience where I was having these like intermittent visions, like eidetic visions behind closed eyes, or actually, you know, I was driving sometimes, so it was just sort of in the translucent, sort of hovering there, you know. I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's like these visions where they're not exactly in this world, but I can see it. And so it was this like purple, beautiful geisha kind of alien woman with long twisted horns, and I didn't know what it was for a number of years. And I would see it occasionally, and I never I would always think, okay, that's cool, but what is that? And so uh, eventually other people started to see it. Right before I left the United States to come to Ecuador, 3 different people told me that they had seen this being and described it correctly, hovering behind me while I'm playing the guitar. And so, I didn't really know what to think of all that, and I didn't connect it with these visions that I had had many, many years before when I was talking to this Native American group they had a message about the star tribes and the role that these interdimensional beings have always played in the evolution of consciousness on Earth. And their message was basically that many of the ancient peoples, not just the Babylonians and Syrians and all of those folks, but a lot of the Native Americans and people in South America, which is, an interesting side note on that is that a lot of people point out the fact that Native people don't have these UFO experiences, and they don't have stories about aliens. But if you look at the newspaper rock in Utah, or you talk to the shamans in Peru about these portals and the kind of beings they interact with, I think we might have to just sort of redefine our concept of what alien is, which is part of my story as well, because what I came to understand is that they're not generally here as physical beings, and that at a certain point in our evolution and consciousness, that's just no longer necessary, which is also one of the goals of the transhumanist movement, to leave the body and to become light and to be able to travel around through different star systems. And we'll get to that, but not yet. So I came to South America and I drank ayahuasca, and I was walking along after a very difficult segment of the trip, and suddenly there's this being that I had seen maybe a decade earlier in front of me, and Pachamama says, well, would you like to know what this is? And I said, well, yes. And she said, it's you, in the same way that one object can be in 2 places in physics. And this can be difficult for people to wrap their heads around. It's not 2 objects. It's not that it's divided and multiplied. It's 1 object in 2 places. She said, you souls are the same, because, in the same way that the universe is like a holographic mind, everything is a reflection of all of its constituent parts, right? So souls are also everywhere in everything, but some things are more clearly defined. Just as in a hologram, you can see, the distinctions that create the shape, whether it's a hologram of an apple or whatever it is, but that's not all that's in the hologram. There's the space around the apple as well. And so I hope I did that justice trying to explain, but basically that I was in 2 places at once, and that this alien geisha thing was me also, as I exist on a gas giant near Sirius B that never became a red dwarf star because of the influence of the other 2 stars. And she told me that these beings transmit what we think of as the secret doctrine, or the mystery school teachings, to all of these beings all around the planet, and even to ayahuasca, to vegetables and minerals, and so she said you exist there in this gaseous state because there's no solidity on this planet, and a few other details. And I actually went into the teepee at the end of the night, and because the talking stick goes around, and I told everyone what had happened and basically the story around it. And I remember I actually started explaining to them like what it was like to be there. We don't really have weather. There's more like chemical reactions in the gases that create what you would think of as wind, and and just all of these details. And so maybe 10 days later, it occurred to me that that I should check and see if there was any astronomical data that supported what I was saying. And I found a paper that had been published only 3 days prior to my checking. So understand this is 10 days after the ceremony, right? So 7 days after the ceremony, this paper was published. And the paper, so the point is that no one on Earth knew this yet at the time of the ceremony. There's no way I had read it and forgotten and just recalled it, because it was not information that existed on Earth for anyone yet. And at the time of the ceremony, that was still true. And so, as it turns out, the astronomers felt that they had confirmed the existence of a third planetary body, making it a tertiary star system and not binary, except that the third star did not become a red dwarf because of the influence of the two other stars. And so what really hit me in that moment was that I would not have known that. I don't know whether they're talking about the gravitational influence, I would assume, but for me to have just spontaneously generated this idea that these stars had exerted influence on a gas giant so that it never became a red dwarf. And you know, I was really grateful for all the people that were in the teepee, because when I looked this stuff up, one of them was with me. My partner actually was there, Enrico was there that night. And so she witnessed all of this. And I just had to consider the possibility that I had legitimately received this information. Well, what I'm saying is that it didn't come from the collective mind of humans, at least not living humans. And so I had to consider the very strong probability that I had legitimately received information through whatever mechanism about a star system that is like crazy, crazy, crazy far away. And it's not the first time. A few days after that, because this kind of lit a fire under my ass, and I'm like, okay, so, you know, Robert Anton Wilson had this crazy experience with Sirius B. I've had this experience with the exact same thing. And so I started to look, and I uncovered the writings of, I can't ever remember if her name is Anne Bailey or Alice Bailey, but she was a student of Helena Blavatsky. Helena Blavatsky was a Russian princess. I don't know if it was like Russia, but you know, somewhere near Eastern European princess of some kind, of some nationality. And she spoke like 22 languages. She was, you know, highest IQ possible, which is always what I think about when people say that only stupid people believe in magic and telepathy and all of these things. It actually looks to me like only the smartest people on Earth believe in that kind of stuff, and then also the stupidest people do, because they believe anything. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, well, yeah, that is true. So I guess, I mean, what you're saying is that, I mean, it was a 2-page article, and I'm pretty sure that it was the announcement that it was discovered like the day before or something, you know, that, so yeah, I mean, maybe they had seen it. I guess it's possible, but, at any rate, so I looked into the relationship with Sirius B and this kind of stuff, and I found right away, I think it was the first thing I looked at, either Anne Bailey or Alice Bailey, I can't remember her name, but she's absolutely brilliant. She wrote all kinds of big, thick, fat occult books, like a treatise on white magic, and gosh, I can't remember any of the names. The treatise on white magic is the one that I think I had. But she was absolutely brilliant, you know, probably another genius level woman and student of Blavatsky. And so she's saying that there are these beings on a third planet, or a third celestial body near Sirius B, and that they transmit the secret doctrine to people like Blavatsky and Crowley and, you know, Thoth. And of course, we do need to go back to Egypt to talk about this idea of star beings and this teaching that seems to be emanating to us from star beings. And according to certain Native Americans and mystery school adepts and channelers and an awful lot of people, this is something that is quite common actually, and that has been going on for quite a long time. But I'd also think that it's worth noting that in my case, the information that I received about that gas giant in the Sirius star system turning out to be accurate. The only other case that I'm aware of where something is like recorded for sure is that pyramid at the bottom of the ocean in the Illuminatus trilogy, and that guy also happened to have contacted telepathically an alien from Sirius B. So there seems to be some consistency that I'm noticing here. And so aside from Blavatsky's, okay, but this is what's crazy, not Blavatsky, Bailey, about this, the way that she explained these beings and what they do was not just similar to what Pachamama had explained to me, or ayahuasca. It was identical. She said, you know, they transmit these teachings to the minerals and plants. I mean, it was exactly the same, which was also really odd. And another bit of information that I became aware of around that time is that the blue star that is in Masonic lodges represents Sirius. And I had never connected that to all of the rest of this information until that point. And, you know, Freemasonry, regardless of what all of the idiots on the internet might say, really is just a compendium of occult knowledge and the sort of mystery teaching that has been passed down for thousands of years that may have originated with the star beings. And so again, we have this glyph of Sirius B in every single lodge. And I would really like to know how far back that dates, because I'm not really sure when Sirius B was discovered. I think it is a planet that can be seen with the naked eye, or star, excuse me. Yeah, it can be seen. Yeah, you can look at it. I actually know. It flashes red, white, and blue, which is why David Icke claimed that, yeah, Blavatsky definitely talked about the Tools Society in Atlantis, and, you know, she was remarkably brilliant, and I think it's a shame that people are, in my opinion, being intentionally dissuaded from reading Crowley, from reading Blavatsky, from investigating Freemasonry and the Illuminati. They're being convinced that these things that are the best tools that they have to access this sort of consciousness that creates people that cannot be governed, people that have had gnosis, people that do not need to be governed. You could think of it as a plebeian enlightenment, kind of, that should be commonplace, and it should be the rule rather than the exception. And so I think everything that's been demonized, you know, including the transhumanist movement, people talk about Leary being a CIA agent and all this stupid shit, and it's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. To be able to script the level of genius that was Timothy Leary or Terence McKenna or Robert Anton Wilson at their best is beyond the capacity of any government agency. It's just so stupid that and it's also so obviously rooted in propaganda, because they are, what better way to deter potential revolutionaries and nonconformists to ignore exactly the message that people need to hear to liberate them from the influence of their overseers, than for them to take credit for those people and to create this association that compels the potential troublemaking rabble-rouser to ignore exactly the message that they would need to hear. And yeah, Rudolf Steiner is another one of those people from that era, and he was kind of smart enough to downplay his connection with some of these people of a bit darker reputation, but he was very heavily influenced by Aleister Crowley and Blavatsky. You know, it's no secret that Crowley was a bit of a misogynist, but he had tremendous respect for Blavatsky. In fact, I don't know of any other author where he did this, but there is, I think it was The Secret Doctrine, where he wrote a whole book where he goes through paragraph by paragraph, and it's just commentary on what Blavatsky was saying, which, you know, coming from Crowley, that was quite a tip of the hat, because it's certainly uncharacteristic of him to demonstrate that kind of humility towards anyone, much less, you know, Eastern European woman like Blavatsky. And so, what is it though? What is this message that's emanating from the stars that has the potential to liberate humanity? I think it's actually emanating from everywhere. I think that individual beings, I guess, you could think of them as antennas, and also vectors of convergence, right? Because really the universe is just all these pulsating waves, and we get density where there are vectors. And so where there's this density, we could think of it as emanating like a more focused ray, you know, and at a certain level of density, consciousness has self-awareness, and so it can make decisions about where it's going to emanate and why, right? And so that may explain why there seems to be the necessity of these messengers, whether they be human, alien, crystalline, plant. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have never talked to a plant, but I have. Usually you have to ingest some of it or smoke some of it, get some of it in there somehow, but talking to plants is definitely a thing. At any rate, I think really it's emanating from all around us, and that it has taken a tremendous effort of indoctrination and programming and hypnotism in order to sort of create an interference pattern so that we do not receive the signals that are coming in from awareness from everywhere in the universe. You know, in my case, you know, if I'm different at all, the only thing I've ever been able to come up with is that I was not really subjected to the societal and cultural influence, because I always lived outside of society. I never really went to school. There was never a television in my house. I only started using the internet in the last 10 years or so. And so this awareness of certain aspects and elements of the universe that seem really obvious to me, that I'm noticing like a lot of people are you know, starting to come to some awareness. I mean, when there were less of us, it was very difficult for me to believe, because I just felt like I must be insane. And you know, aside from the conspiracy theory, going back to Robert Anton Wilson, it could be just that got to him eventually. Because up until pretty recently, people that, I don't know how to say it, know what I know, I guess, were few and far between. And you know, it's only in the last maybe 10 years that there has really been an explosion that it's becoming more commonplace. Another little bit of inspiring information is I don't think the veil is actually that thick. And I'll give you a great example from the MKUltra program of why I feel that it's actually really easy for us to reprogram. Do me a favor too, you guys, like, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. There's other possible ways to support cryptocurrency. And if you want Patreon for cryptocurrency, just send me an email and tell me what you want in return. And because we're demonetized, I get no money for this. There's no super chat button, so you know, it's getting difficult for me to justify doing the channel at all, because I put a lot of time into it and I don't get paid for it. And I feel like it's really important to get the message out, but since COVID, it's been a struggle. So I have to, you know, invest my time, unfortunately, where I have to and not where I want to. So if you guys want me to have to do this, You have to pay me, or else I can't. I have to do it. You know what I mean? So, at any rate, man, my plug for support just totally scrambled my focus. Oh, the veil, it's not that thick. And the explanation that I was going to give from the MKUltra program is absolute proof of this. One of the great benefits of psychedelics, and particularly LSD, which has turned out that it is the most efficacious at catalyzing new neurogenesis and enhancing neuroplasticity. So, you know, people would think, well, it would be DMT or psilocybin, and it's not. It's LSD. That's actually the best for reprogramming. And so the mind really just physically creates itself from directives from consciousness. And so I think that, you know, when I say things like truth is self-substantiating, this is a wonderful example of that. Because we have this argument about whether or not consciousness can influence energy, and I can do this, so I'm not really sure what the debate is about. But, you know, for example, are we misinterpreting the Copenhagen interpretation of the light particle wave duality thing? I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. But even further than that, though, the actual matrix of our neurological structure is created by our thoughts and behaviors. And so it's poignant to me that the organ that we associate with consciousness itself, even though it's probably not true, gives us this expression of this capacity of consciousness. And it's like a thing of being close to the source, right? I always say that great art and music and you know, this stuff that has this power to transform the consciousness of the people that listen or view it or whatever medium it is, it's because it is reflecting that essential essence of universal truth, you know, more closely, and things that don't have that capacity or are weaker representations of this fundamental reality that it is basically conscious awareness. And so, back to the story about MKUltra, though, there was a woman who went to see a doctor, and this is all Freedom of Information Act, it's not conspiracy. You can find interviews with her and her lawyers on YouTube. Can't remember her name, look it up yourself. But she went to the doctor, and it turned out to be one of those Nazi war criminals that they had brought over through Operation Paperclip or whatever to work in Canada. And so, you know, this is again more evidence of New World Order, because why is this CIA thing going down across the Canadian border? It may actually be that the woman was a U.S. citizen and she drove across the Canadian border to see the doctor, and maybe the U.S. government did that to protect themselves from prosecution or something. Yeah, well, ketamine is one of those things. There's a fine line. Ketamine can be very, very bad, and it can be very, very helpful for certain conditions. But what people have to realize is that when we're talking about ketamine or even LSD or something as a tool, we mean to use it in a certain context. And so people lose sight of that a lot, and that gets a bad reputation for these compounds. So anyways, this woman goes to see this doctor, and she never leaves. She's kidnapped by the CIA, and she's strapped down to a bed, and she is shocked with the maximum voltage that you can shock a person with, electroshock therapy, is that what they call it, therapy? I'm not sure if I'm using the right term. And she was given LSD. One of the reasons it's so remarkably safe is because if you take a huge quantity of it, there's a ceiling, and there's a point where your brain cannot receive anymore, and so it just floods through your system and comes out. And you guys have heard a lot of stories probably to the contrary, but if you look at, there's 10 cases where people had taken 20,000 micrograms of LSD and they were taken to the emergency room. They did it accidentally, all of them, and all of them were back to normal within 8 to 10 hours, and none of them had any problems after they were checked up on 5 years later. So all those people that tell you they took too much, they were tripping for 3 days, they're all lying. It's not real. Or they took something that wasn't LSD. Anyways, let's try to stay on track here. So the CIA gets a hold of the woman. They give her ceiling doses of LSD. So she's absolutely as high as you can possibly get on LSD. And they're using electroshock therapy and LSD to completely wipe the slate clean. And this is possible because LSD, it brings the neuroplasticity of, for example, a 55-year-old mind back to that of a 5-year-old. So you can learn at the rate of a toddler again. Yeah, tell me about it, Ray. I found Raz, hey Raz, what's up? I found that out the hard way. I once ate a burrito full of psilocybin mushrooms because we thought that they were dried already, and so I was, or that they hadn't dried, excuse me. So I thought it was much smaller than it really was, and I ended up on a spaceship, and I mean, I won't lie, Mr. Charles, it was a rough, well, it was amazing. I'll tell you guys the story in a minute, actually. Why not? We're talking about aliens and psychedelics anyways, right? So, so this woman is kidnapped, and the reason that they could reprogram her with electroshock therapy and LSD is because it makes the brain very neuroplastic, so you can repattern, you can erase old patterns, and it's also very receptive to new information. So they gave her a new personality, a new name, erased the whole personality just to see if they could, right? And so one day she's at the grocery store, I think 15 years later or something, walking around, and she just snapped out of it. And she's like, this is not my beautiful house. Why am I behind the wheel of a large automobile or whatever? You know, that song by that white funk band, I can't remember what they're called, the Talking Heads. This is not my beautiful wife. This is not my beautiful house. Where am I? And so she hired a lawyer, and somehow this led to using the Freedom of Information Act to get to the bottom of it. And that's how MKUltra was actually uncovered. Because of this woman. So here's the point, though, and this is why this is inspiring and not terrifying. I mean, it's tragic that this happened to this woman. But the reason it's good news to us is that if the CIA can shock the living fuck out of you while you're on the maximum possible amount of LSD for 2 straight weeks, to the point that they completely reprogram your entire being, and you can just snap out of it one day, all of these fucking zombies in the United States and Europe and Asia can just as easily snap out of it eventually under the right circumstances. And while it's true that their programming is probably pretty hardwired after an entire lifetime of exposure, I think it still stands that, you know, it's probably the equivalent to have that much LSD and electricity pumped through your system in order to reprogram you. And so, you know what I mean? If she can snap out of it, so can anyone else. It's just crazy that, you know, the governments do this kind of stuff, and people will still get defensive, like, oh, they wouldn't do that. You know, this is one of my biggest, like, pet peeve is not the right word, but I don't understand how, you know, you could ever use that argument when they have already kindled the same energy that lights the stars upon women and children in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Non-combatant, innocent mothers, women, dogs, children, birds, whatever. 200,000 of them or something? Like, they wouldn't do that. They've admitted to kidnapping their own citizens. They've admitted to giving Guatemalans gonorrhea or syphilis, like weaponized versions of it. I don't know what it is that, you know, writing something off just because it sounds like a conspiracy theory is so dangerous. Yeah, so that's that part of it. And then there's another thing I realized I forgot to mention. This starseed idea, which I've never looked up, by the way. I've never looked up the New Age definition, like what these people think they're talking about. I've always just assumed that it is, yeah, cognitive dissonance is a difficult one. It's the one that I've learned the hard way. Is very difficult to confront because before the internet, when I was face to face with people, I could tell them anything, and I'm very, very good at reading their body language, and I can see signals, and I know how to adapt so that I can continue to communicate. Because when you confront someone's cognitive dissonance, the neurological reaction, and this is the same thing, this kind of biophysical, biochemical reaction is the same as, you know, putting gold in the right type of acid to dissolve. You know what I mean? It's the same as a chemical catalyst. The reaction is pretty much guaranteed and it's consistent. And so what happens is fight or flight. And when you're dealing with someone on the internet, they can just unsubscribe, block, unfriend, whatever. And so now that, you know, the majority of communications happen on the internet, you not only have the censors working against you, you not only have the herd conformity pressure working against you, you have the prejudice of the people that you're trying to communicate with has developed a sort of omnipotence that they can just delete you from the universe, and then this unsettling influence is now gone. And I've noticed that my power on the internet is nothing compared to what it is in person, which is why you all need to support me so I can go back to the United States. I don't know how many of you guys all know, but we got hacked after 2 years of struggling a little while ago, and I thought I had found some projects that were going to allow us to just recover right away, and there's been some bad news in that department in the last few days, so, man, you know, it was just so goddamn brutal, and I do believe in passivity and forgiveness, but if I could find any scammer and, you know, feed their balls to a pit bull while they're still attached to them, I would not hesitate. This is such a brutal thing to do. And what are we trying to do here, you guys? We're down here giving all the money that we make to indigenous communities and stuff, trying to, you know, have some impact and save the jungle, and you're gonna steal all of our money? Like, I'm just, anyways, I don't want to get stuck on that tangent. But it, you know, it looks to me at this point that even skeptical people like myself, Robert Anton Wilson, oh, I didn't mention Timothy Leary, Aleister Crowley. A lot of people aren't aware of this aspect of him, but the earliest instance of the common gray alien depiction that we get from like abductees and all those sorts of people, Jack Pearson's, who was one of the very early NASA rocket scientists, was doing what was called, I think, the Paris workings with Aleister Crowley, and they kept a diary of everything that transpired. And so at some point, a black hole sort of affair, a wormhole, not a black hole, I guess it would have sucked everything in, probably the whole planet, we'd all be slurped away in 1943 or whatever the hell it was. So they opened up this thing, this portal, and this thing came through that Crowley called the LAM, L-A-M. I don't know what it stood for, but it looked just like a modern rendition of a gray alien, and just coincidentally, he happens to be working with an early, it was actually the precursor to NASA, it was before NASA, rocket scientist, when this alien thing comes through the portal. And so it looked just like these gray aliens, and the only other person outside of my own experience and Robert Anton Wilson's pyramid at the bottom of the ocean that actually turned out to be exactly where he said it was in the book, right? And remember that this was in the context of a fictional story. It's not like he was deliberately trying to make a prediction, but the ocean is fucking big, and that pyramid was exactly where he put it in the book in 1974. You know, not to mention all the other stuff. The relationship with Sirius of all potential star systems, and the reception of apparently accurate prophetical information is consistent with all of these people that have contact with these things from Sirius. And the record of it is incontrovertible at this point. In fact, the Book of the Law is so specific in its predictions that professional skeptics whose job it is to debunk Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce and all of these kind of people that have dismissed Edgar Cayce and Nostradamus and all of them. We're confronted with the Book of the Law. They say things like interesting but not conclusive, which coming from a professional skeptic is quite a lot. It means that they cannot really dismiss it. And one of the things is the specificity. I mentioned this last night, but it's worth repeating that, you know, Crowley talks about the new eon. He says that he talks about using drugs to communicate with these interdimensional beings as one of the characteristics of it. He talks about people becoming more bisexual and epicene. Epicene is a word that means that you're of indeterminate sex, so you have a different pronoun probably than you were born with, right? This is 1910 that he's writing all this stuff about now, right? And the timeline was about 100 years. So he gave a timeline and specific information. He also, the Iwas, this being, this star being basically, tells him that the world would be soaked in blood by the Great War. And the interesting part of that is that Great War was capitalized as if it was a proper title. If it was just Great War as like a descriptive, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. But it's capitalized. World War I happened, I think, 4 years after the book was transmitted, or something, 3 years. And it came to be called the Great War. And also, the technological advancements and this current period basically did demonstrably and observably start right when that thing said it would. And then there are other examples throughout that book that are pretty goddamn convincing. And we do have this consistent source of origin with all of these things. The one element I wanted to mention, though, that I keep glossing over, is that, you know, we did receive the term Starseed. And I didn't know that the guy that popularized this idea, the book Starseed Transmissions, called them the Starseed Transmissions, because Timothy Leary also referred to them as the Starseed Transmissions. And in case you weren't here at the beginning of the, I'm actually going to read them, by the way. At the beginning of the live stream, I was saying that Timothy Leary is actually the origin of the term starseed, and he was not on psychedelics when he received the starseed signals. And they were received by 4 people at the same time, supposedly, that were in a collective meditation. He was inside of the prison at the time. Sorry, it looks like I navigated away. I had meant to leave them up so that I could, maybe this is it. Yes, here we go. Okay, so earlier I started to say, so what is this message? And then I went on all these other tangents. So let's have a look at what the message is. And it's the same message I think everyone gets. And it says that this was a vision shared by Leary's wife, a fellow prisoner at the prison named Wayne Benner, and a journalist that all had this collective hallucination without the aid of psychedelics. In 19 stages of bursts of communication came the following. It is time for life on Earth to leave the planetary womb and to learn to walk through the stars. You can almost hear Terence McKenna interjecting, history is ending, right? Life was seeded on your planet billions of years ago by nucleotide templates, which contain the blueprint for gradual evolution through a sequence of biomechanical stages. The goal of evolution is to produce nervous systems capable of communicating with and returning to the galactic network where we, your interstellar parents, await you. Life on planet Earth has now reached this halfway point, established itself, and evolved through larval mutations and metamorphoses to the 7 brain stages. At this time, the voyage home is possible. Life on planet Earth has now, assemble the most intelligent, advanced, courageous of your species. divided equally between men and women. You are about to discover the key to immortality in the chemical structure of the genetic code, within which you will find the scripture of life. The time has come for you to accept the responsibility of immortality. It is not necessary for you to die. You will discover the key to enhanced intelligence within the chemistry of the nervous system. Certain chemicals, used wisely, will enable your nervous system to decipher the genetic code. All life on your planet is a unity. All life must come home. Total freedom, responsibility, and interspecies harmony will make the voyage possible. You must transcend larval identities of race, culture, and nationality. Your only allegiance is to life. The only way you'll survive is to make the voyage home. The Japanese people are the most advanced race on your planet and will give protection to the company. We are sending a comet to your solar system as a sign that the time has come to look to the stars. When you arrive back home, you will be given new instructions and powers. Your sperm ship is the flower of terrestrial life. As soon, I didn't notice that the first time I read it. As soon as the company is formed and the voyage begun, war, poverty, hatred, fear will disappear from your planet, and the most ancient prophecies and celestial visions will be realized. Mutate, come home in glory. And then there's a note that later that year, Comet Kohutek, as predicted, arrived in the solar system and spaced out into the sun. And so the flower of life, the sperm ship that he mentioned, he's of course talking about the glyph. I believe we call it the Tree of Life in Merkaba. It's also been called, is, in my opinion, it's just sort of like a, like if you take a cookie cutter and chop a segment out, you know, and those are basically the electromagnetic waves that make up our consciousness, and they're vectors of intersection. It's like a picture of that. And so what he's saying is that the ship is consciousness itself, and consciousness is it is born of light. And so Merkaba means chariot of light. And the Zulu, who I neglected to mention earlier when I was talking about people who have connections with Sirius that have apparently accurate information that they couldn't possibly have. It's not the Zulu, sorry, it's the Dogon, who also may have given us marijuana, and they claim that these extraterrestrial beings brought the marijuana plant to the tribe and gave it to them, and that's how humanity received cannabis. And it is true that it is the most biologically sophisticated plant on Earth. It's almost like an alien species. And so they also have an accurate map of a star system 7 star systems away that was just in the last 20 years, I think, photographed by Hubble or mapped by Hubble. And they've had this since like the 1930s. So, and guess where these beings are from? The dog star, Sirius, again. You know, it really looks like every time we find some provably accurate star system shit, Sirius is always involved. And I'm sorry if you're an Andromedon or Arcturian or whatever other kind of starseed, I have not seen anything from any of that, you know, any of those people that is like demonstrably true. So if it's interesting, but I'm talking about stuff that is definitely real, that, you know, people couldn't have known. It's always serious. So what was the reason for bringing up the Dogon again? Probably the star system and the see, we were talking about Leary having received it. Oh, okay, yeah, here we go. So they also have the word Merkaba, and it means the same thing. So that doesn't make any sense either. And so the idea basically, and this is something that Yeah, well, the Pleiadians, that's the other element of this that I have always been kind of drawn to. A lot of the women in my life have made some kind of assertion that they're somehow connected to the Pleiades, like it's like a dolphin kind of vibe. Yeah, and you're a girl too, of course. So I don't know what that's about. It's very feminine energy coming from the Pleiades. It's like the water, the seven sisters, right? I mean. Sorry about that. We're down to the last like 20% of battery. I don't know where you guys lost me, but I was talking about the Dogon tribe and their star system. Yeah, well, okay, so you heard the Seven Sisters, so it was just really recently. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so the Merkaba thing means chariot of light. And so very early on in my contemplations of all this, I thought, okay, well, everything goes full circle. You know, Hermes, dragon of light, is the Ouroboros, consuming itself eternally. It's light. Matter is light in a standing wave. Light consumes matter very slowly, but it does. So there's only light and consciousness giving form via symmetry to this energy. And so if the fundamental basis of our consciousness is light, then there is no reason that we couldn't retain our consciousness in light. And then later I discovered, of course, that magicians from the Western occult tradition talk about formulating the body of light so that they can travel around. And actually shamans here in South America that use ayahuasca to do the same thing, basically do the same thing. And so this idea that you could become a chariot of light, that you could release some unified essence of self that contains your consciousness and travel around the universe as basically a wave of light. Also, when you reach the speed of light, I figured out why this is the other day too. I think I figured out why the maximum speed is the speed of light. It's because, well, let me just finish this other thought first. Cliffhanger. When you reach the speed of light, time stops. So if you're zipping around the universe, you traveling at the speed of light, no time is going to pass for you. So it's going to be instantaneous. It may as well be teleporting, even if you're traveling all the way across the entire universe at the speed of light. It's going to be basically instantaneous from your point of view. The problem with that is that 100 million years or whatever is still going to pass on your home planet. So, kind of at a disadvantage in terms of going home ever, I guess. But it also occurred to me that eventually, you know, our evolutionary goal could be to transcend our meat puppet suits, right? And this is really what, you know, Robert Anton Wilson and Terrence McKenna and the singer from Tool and pretty much anyone that has ever really contemplated all this stuff, eventually it seems like we all kind of realize all of this. One of the great values for me in my own journey was that I didn't really read this stuff everywhere until it had already occurred to me. And that was like the strangest part of it, you know, for me to like look out and see that, you know, this stuff was already in place in all of these marvelously bizarre forms and places. So becoming light beings, traveling around the universe to different star systems. Here's the thing though, why bother? If it's possible to transmit telepathically all over the universe from any place, and even from a scientific basis. And this is why people that say that, you know, there's no basis in this scientific compendium of knowledge for telepathy or any of this stuff, that is actually irrational. They tell you you're irrational for believing in this stuff, but then they deny empirical evidence in their efforts to diminish you. I don't know, because the reality is that non-locality is a fact in energy systems, as we know from quantum physics. We know about entrainment. So there's actually no reason to think that information cannot be transmitted from another star system telepathically, because we know that information can be transmitted that way. In fact, we have computers on the space station right now that use entanglement to communicate with other computers on Earth instantly. And so I think, it's really this thing of human arrogance that people want to think that our mechanical creations are transcendent of biology, because we have not come anywhere near the complexity and sophistication and miraculous creation of nature and biology. I mean, the human brain is still the most complex and least understood of all of the systems that are known to humanity. And so for us to make assumptions that the human brain is not capable of doing something that our computers can do seems completely irrational to me. But, it is fair to say that we have a lot of difficult and largely unanswerable questions. For example, channeling or precognition or receiving information from other universes that is verifiable or that seems to have any kind of any indication that it needed to come from some preternatural or superhuman source is pretty thin. I mean, most of the supposedly channeled New Age books that I've seen, there's nothing in there that I would think needs to come from a higher intelligence. It's just all the same crap that everyone says in all of those books. So, it seems like the legitimate instances of this kind of thing are relatively uncommon, but I think that they're pretty much provably at least existent. So what were we talking? We were talking about the, okay, you can become light and you can send your consciousness all around the universe, but it would take forever, and if you can just telepathically communicate with people from anywhere in the universe, then why do you need to spend hundreds of millions of years, even at the speed of light, zipping around the universe? I also have felt very strongly, I had one encounter with visible, talking stars is a whole nother conversation. I had one of my experiences, I guess, where I received information, it's not exactly like that. I'll just tell you the story. I was going through a very rapid awakening period. Around the same time, I was about to tell you the story about this encounter with these interdimensional beings, which is when I became convinced that they aren't aliens in the physical, like they're not physically here. They don't need to be. It's an interdimensional hologram or something, something along those lines. So I was trying to cooperate with this voice that was guiding me, and I've read McKenna. I know that it's no accomplishment to hear a voice in your head, and that you're really flirting with disaster taking that sort of thing too seriously. So I was on the fence about how to deal with this, to ignore it or whatever. And it was accurate enough that I was like, okay, I'll play along unless it tells me to do something harmful. But up until that point, I'm game. So, and that led to all kinds of crazy shit. I wanted to talk to Danny Carey, the drummer from Tool. I just drove right to him, like all sorts of stuff like that. That's just like borderline impossible. And so on this occasion, it told me to just go out and have this ritual to Ra and sun ritual, sun worship thing. And I was like, well, I don't know any rituals, and I don't really believe in that kind of stuff. So, and I already started to walk outside, and I'm like talking myself out of it. And when I pivoted to turn around to go home, my phone beeped, like perfect timing. And I pulled it out, and it was a message from the singer from my band, who is from the swamps in Texas, and does not talk like this. And it said, "You and your brothers will echo this gospel to the four corners of the globe, and yet the sun shines on." And the sun was going down, so I had limited time, and that message was, I was like, well, that's not from Clint, like, and eventually I asked him about it, and he didn't know why he sent that message, and he you know, that's not how he talks. I don't think he would be offended if I called him a redneck. I mean, he's from swamps in Texas, like, doesn't talk like that. He's not, it didn't make any sense. So I go out to the field, and I sit on this boulder, and there's, you know, just grass all around me, and there's this Anasazi cave that has like spirals painted in it that I can see across the valley, and I'm like, okay, so what do I do? And so I'm sitting, and this voice says, well, raise the energy, and I'm like, how? And it's like, just do it. And so I'm like, okay, and I close my eyes and I try, and once I can feel this tingling, all of the rattlesnakes in the field are like they all just light up all at once, and I realized, like, okay, fucking something is happening right now. And so then I'm like, okay, well, what now? And I had learned that as things pass through the veil, they're reversed. And this is a very important thing to understand. We have heard this from all the great mystics. They talk about how it's all reflections, and reflections reverse images. And so this is something, you know, it's really important to have this in your awareness. And so the voice said, what is your name? My birth name is Harley. And it said, what's your name backwards? And I was like, what? Yell Ra? Oh, Yell Ra. And I'm like, sun god. And I'm sitting there looking at the sun. So I start screaming Ra at the top of my lungs at the sun. And I do this for some time until the sun goes down. And the next day, I went to the gas station. Whoops. So where did you guys lose me? I only have 10% of my battery left. That's why it froze. Can somebody tell me where I was in that story in the comments? Because I don't know when the screen froze. Have we gotten to the part about the rattlesnakes and the... I don't want to repeat all that. Oh, okay, you could hear it. Okay, right on. All right. So the next day, I drive to the gas station, and I see on the front page of the newspaper that the most powerful solar storm that they estimate occurs every 26,000 years, which also happens to be the great cycle of the Mayans. The most powerful solar storm in probably 26,000 years had occurred at exactly the time that I was doing the sun ritual. And of course, I'm not saying that I caused it, but it does seem that something new, something was happening, and something guided me out there to do this thing at this time. I'm mentioning that partly because, you know, Mr. Charles mentioned the Ra contact, and during that period in my life, Ra was basically the central, just as it's the sun, the central light of all of these experiences was Ra, basically. And one of the things that ultimately led to is this idea that the stars are beings, and that they're spiritual essence is sort of projected onto planets, and the story sort of tells itself to itself until the one soul that has been divided for the sake of union sort of recoagulates and reunifies and returns home, which is basically what the Starseed Transmissions that Timothy Leary wrote in that prison were saying is the ultimate objective. So, my battery's going to die. I could probably keep going forever. I don't know if you're still there, Raz, but if so, you can call me on WhatsApp on the other phone in 5 minutes. And one more time, guys, please do support us on Patreon. We got hacked. They took all of our money. We have not recovered. And I got to be able to justify doing this channel, and so support us if you want us to continue making videos. I honestly have considered pulling the plug because I put so much time into it relative to what comes out of it that it's hard to justify anymore. And I know that, you know, it's important to a lot of you guys, and a lot of you guys have become important to me. You know, but at this point after COVID, where there's such a stranglehold that has been put on us financially, that I'm kind of in a position where I have to do things. I can't decide to do things. I've never been in that position in my adult life either, which is really pissing me off. I mean, that's the whole point of my existence, right? It's to do as I wilt is the whole of my law. With the caveat that love is the law. And I'm sure that we will prevail, but you know, as far as living my life in accordance with my essential being, this is the most difficult time that I've ever had doing it. So we've got to overcome the New World Order because they're actually succeeding in squashing people like me. They really are. They demonetized, which means that it's not just that my channel doesn't get as high of a priority in your feed. It's buried unless you have your subscription or your notifications on or whatever. Just won't tell you. So my head hurts and I've been talking forever, but thank you guys for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon, hopefully, if you pay me well enough.